Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second panel of the festival, Coast is Queer. And we have a special guest, Festival Krokodil, here at the Coast is Queer, and queer writers from the Post-Yugoslav region. It is my great pleasure to welcome Anja, Leila, and Dragoslava and Festival Krokodil at the Coast is Queer. Both festival and this panel hold a special significance for me. I lost some of my connections with the queer community in Belgrade when I moved to the UK, and I found new ones in Brighton by working with my queer colleagues and friends from New Writing South, the Marlborough Theatre, and the Centre for the Study of Sexual Dissident. So this event feels like a much needed and long overdue reconnection, I must say, with my post-Yugoslav queer community. And in the wake of Brexit and the ongoing pandemic, it is even more important to foster these connections across borders. So Leila, Anja, and Dragoslava, please introduce yourself and your writing to the UK and wider audience.
Thank you, Vedrana. It's a pleasure to me to be here. Thank you for your introduction. First of all, I want to thank you both the festivals, Krokodil Festival and Coast is Queer, to inviting us and for organizing this panel. Yes, I'm writer and also I'm activist, and I'm coming from Serbia, exactly from Belgrade, the city of capital of Serbia. I wrote prosa, mostly short stories, and until this day, I published one collection of short stories, Golden Bullet, 10 years ago, maybe, and also one novel, Paper Disco Balls, which German edition is coming soon, next month in Berlin, and I am very happy because of that. Also, I edited the anthology Post-Yugoslavian lesbian short stories, Decent Life, which 33 authors from ex-republics that write about lesbian life in Balkan. However, I also deal with poetry in certain way. It's very interesting experience for me. I was a part of slam poetry in Novi Sad, the slam scene poetry in Novi Sad, and after that in Belgrade. In that period, I organized queer slam poetry during the Pride Weeks in Belgrade, 3 or 4 years. Some of my stories and poems translated into English and German and other European languages. And I prefer to say that I do in my writing lyricism, that activism plus literature. And some of my obsessive themes is lesbian life in patriarchal system in Serbia, and also 19th and war in Balkan. That shortly.
Thank you, Dragoslav. I like this new term, literature and activism,
Yes,
and the
literature.
way you kind of bring it together. Leila?
So I'm a writer from Bosnia, from Sarajevo. Till now, I published 2 books of short stories and 1 book of plays. My second book of short stories is translated in the Yugoslav region, also in German and Polish. Now I'm expecting the translation into English and in Italian. So I live here in Sarajevo. I cannot say for myself that I'm activist in a strict way, but I'm really connected to our society here, and we share many common interests and also problems today. So Dragoslava mentioned also 1 book of short lesbian stories from our region. Maybe that's how it began everything, because this book introduced us all to each other from the region, and that's how I know Dragoslava. Yeah. After that, I think I met Anja in one festival in Istra. So somehow we live in separate countries now, but we are really connected, and we know each other works. So.
Lovely. Thanks, Leila. And finally, Anya, please introduce yourself.
Uh, Hi, thanks. Um, yeah, we met in Forum Tomica actually, which was like one of the first places where I also met other women writing in the part of ex-Yugoslavia. And Dragoslava's book I bought in Belgrade. Actually, I was looking for it, like, and then it popped up somewhere, and I was like, all right, this I'm looking for months now. So it was like we didn't meet in person yet, but this is like the first time we meet. Like, but of course we know each other's work. As Leila said, I would just say to that, yeah, absolutely. It's new. It's a lot of new countries now, but the the space I think is elementary intertwined, and we follow each other's work. I always it's a problem in Slovenia where I am from, where I also mostly reside, to get books in BHS. So I have like a link established now, a friend in Zagreb who then he hides them and secretly transports them, so I don't need to pay the postal charges, which is also a problem because it did not used to be. It was a completely normal thing. We could get books here in all the ex-Yugoslavian languages, but now it's a very different. And also, our language, Slovenian, is not so well read. It's not spoken and not well read in the ex-Yugoslavian countries, so it's harder for us to to like for other people to read our things. So I was very glad, and I just got last year I got my first translation into Bihać languages of any of them. My third book was translated by Sandorf in Croatia. So it's finally now possible for me to also have a dialogue about the work with my colleagues and friends across ex-Yugoslavia. Before it wasn't possible because none of it was probably was okay translated. Yeah, I'm a poet. I live in Ljubljana, where I also am now. I would live a lot of my time. I would spend also in Belgium, in Brussels, but not in these times now, obviously. So now I'm more stuck to Ljubljana. I have 4 books published in Slovenia. And then I also work as an editor-in-chief of a small publishing house that is specialized in graphic novels and comics for children. That I, with some friends together, we created that, and now it's 7 years going. So I'm editor there, and I also translate things. Recently, now I'm just waiting for this translation of Max Porter's first book, "Grief is a Thing with Feathers," to be published. It's just announced that it will be published in these days. That I translated together with Katja Šapunic. What my public work or work in civil society is concerned, I I do what I think I'm most capable of doing, which is I write. I try to be active with writing, so I am a columnist. I publish on Patreon regularly, but then I also have a regular column on national television in a show called Studio City.
Obviously, the issue with Slovenian language and then some of the other languages is quite interesting because, as you say, while we speak nearly the same language with some kind of small variations, Slovenian is slightly different. So the issue of translation
In
is obviously
Macedonian also.
absolutely, and Macedonian as well. And also Albanian as well, from the kind of the whole region. So we'll obviously speak about some of these differences, but I'd like to start by kind of reflecting on obviously something that has perhaps affected all of us, because generationally there is a couple of years difference between us, but we have all been affected by the violent redrawing of borders and the war, whose ramifications are still felt today throughout the region, although perhaps in different ways, depending on whether you were, let's say, in Sarajevo, Ljubljana, or Belgrade, for example, whether you were this or that ethnic group. And I think what was forgotten in all of this, that we were all human, to paraphrase the lately departed actress Mira Furlan. So I just wonder how the disintegration of Yugoslavia has shaped your writing. Has it shaped it at all? And how does this intersect with queerness?
I guess. Except on our personal perspective, Yugoslavia war caused trauma on the whole society, I think. This isn't just our intimate trauma, but wider social trauma, in which we 30 years after, 32 years after the war, still some of our societies successfully or less successfully are overcoming it. In my point of view, a big problem of the 19th war is the one that our generation, even if with witnesses, it did not know anything about it. Yes, we are children of the war, whether we are aware of it or not. When I say that, I think that we are not children of war only in physical, material sense, but in cultural sense. It's more important and linguistically sense. In that way, my writing is certain quest for an understanding on what happened to us. In my novel, in my first and not last novel, Paper Disco Balls, I'm writing about growing up one queer girl in 19th in our countries in transition from socialism to capitalism. And also I write about a war from a child perspective. I write about a girl who wants to play football with boys, 19th in Yugoslavia, where the war is just about to start. And indeed, even today, we know so little about all that happened to us. In that novel, I choose to speak from child's perspective. That it's from my own experience, because I do not dare writing about war out of that experience and speak on behalf of others. It is a very emotionally difficult to understand the disintegration of Yugoslavia, and you must admit that is very frustration and very frustrating for the one who wants to be responsible to the past, responsible to her writing, to herself.
Thank you, Dragoslava. So that's the perspective from Belgrade. I suppose I'll bring in Anya here because the Slovenian perspective may be slightly different.
Yeah, it is. But no, I would of course say, fortunately, it is, because our war was actually a conflict that lasted 10 days. They say a bit more actually, but they say it's a 10-day event. So I'm glad that I can use brackets here when I say war. And I was finishing primary school and going to our first year of gymnasium, I think, when this happened. So to me personally, it did not leave like a mark where I would use it in my narrative or in my content, like what I would write about in poetry. But I would of course agree. We all, it is a part of us and our lives. I don't write directly about it, and it's not a topic that I would address directly. It is a part of me. So for one vision that I have is this nostalgic perspective. What was before? For me, for example, one of the images that I see immediately, and when I was preparing for this talk, I had this image all the time in my head, is like a concert of a group, EKV, Ekaterina Velika, before the war, where there is a stake. I saw this on YouTube, is a stake of Milan, the singer, saying, or even, I think it's, I don't know if it's him, someone of the group, the bass player or the leader, saying to the microphone while starting a song, Mir, ljudi, mir. So it's a which means peace, people, peace. And this was just before, at the brink of the start of the conflict, when already it was obvious that something is going to happen and that it's going to be quite brutal. So this is one image that I hold in my head, and then it comes together with another image when I was standing at the central square in Ljubljana in front of the parliament in July, first half and end of the first half of July, paying tribute to the victims of Srebrenica, standing with women holding like cloths with names of people that died there. So this is another image, and between these two images, all of these things happen. That of course, even if my country was not a part of this war in such content that probably Leila or Dragoslav can speak about, you cannot erase this from our memory as a whole.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, Dragoslav and you spoke about that kind of sense of collective trauma, but it's also interesting that you bring in a piece of activist history that is perhaps very little known outside of our region, especially the women in black and the kind of anti-war and peace movement throughout the region of former Yugoslavia that up until today is actually protesting and also constantly speaking about this sense of collective responsibility, but also kind of trying to bring about reconciliation, which will take decades to obviously happen. So I'll bring in Leila now, obviously from Sarajevo.
I wrote about the war mainly in my second book of short stories called Mjesteban, and I also dedicated one play to this topic. My situation in that context is a little bit complex because I'm from ethnically mixed family. We lived in Sarajevo, but my father's parents and this side of the story, of the family story, they are Muslims, and the parents from my mother's side, they are Serbs. But in that time of Yugoslavia, I only knew that I'm Yugoslavian and that we are Yugoslavians. One big thing in all this, that story is that actually I grew up without a mother. My mother died when I was 2 years old. And I inherit some stories about her, like she was a Yugoslavian woman, she was communist, and I was raised in that spirit till the war. So the falling apart of Yugoslavia somehow is falling apart of my family. When the war started in Sarajevo, I was here. I lived with father and his parents in one part of old town called Vratnik. It's almost completely Muslim area, and it was in that time of the beginning it was bombed really strong, so they all decided to transfer me to my mother parents. They lived in another part of Sarajevo, and in really short time, less than 1 month, the city was divided in two parts. So from that moment our family broke up, because in that moment I stayed with my mother parents, and we were in this area under Serbian arms control in that time. So the only reasonable thing in that time was to escape, and the only way for escape was for us to go to Serbia, because my grandmother is from Serbia, from Vojvodina, and her family is still living there. And so for 2 years I was a refugee in Serbia. And finally in 1994 I managed to come back to Sarajevo during the war. So this war, it lasted for 4 years. I was at the beginning in the Sarajevo, then I was refugee for 2 years, and then got back home, and maybe the war lasted for 1 year. And in all the time I was a kid. When the war started I was 12. When it finished I was, I don't know, 15, 16 years. and I actually didn't understand what happened to us. And it was somehow, especially I was growing up, knowing or not knowing in some part of my life that I'm a lesbian, and it was all mixed up in this traditional transitional time. So definitely, the war that happened here, it marked my life really strong, and it is a big topic in my writing. But in years that will come, I understand that for me, this topic of the war in Yugoslavia and topic me being lesbian in this very patriarchy and this traditional lifestyle is not, they are not actually two different topics. It's the same thing, because I started to look at the war and everything that happened to us from this perspective. What happened to the queer people? Where were they? What happened to with their lives? And that's is something that is interested me still, and I'm trying to write something new about it.
Thank you so much, Leila. I mean, I think the three of you speak about the complexity of the war and from your own personal, I suppose, experiences and the way particularly it has affected you as a child. I mean, we were all, I suppose, children during that time or kind of coming into age and also coming out during that time. So as you say, those two situations are completely interlinked. And I really wanted to open up the discussion with some of these questions because perceptions and understandings of what happened to us there are often limited and simplified here. So to paraphrase our writer Dubravka Ugrasic, global or Western literary market only needs one representative writer from our small countries, and they become a kind of an anthropologist or a sociologist, or to quote her, a translator of their own reality and the reality of their country into a language comprehensible to West European readers. So I want to emphasize and avoid that, and I'm interested obviously in your stories and your experience. Do you feel an additional sense of responsibility and also vulnerability as an openly LGBTQ writer?
If I had label myself, I would say I'm East European lesbian writer. These labels definitely shaped me and my work the best. But also, it's important how other people see me and my work, my writing and my activism. My queerness does not take roots only from my lesbian experiences. It's impossible, but from exposure from what is called queer culture. And now I want to try to explain what queer mean for me with some poetry. Mm, in my free translated, it's not original translate. Uh, all and nothing is there. Arrow that misses the target hits all else. These quotes are taken from one exhibition from poet Vladimir Kopiclo from Novi Sad, one of the pioneers of conceptual art in Serbia. This is how I see and feel queer. What misses that main thing? And yes, I try to be responsible in my writing. Example, right now I'm trying to write a new collection of stories about depression. Uh, this is also a quest for answers, but also for strategies for survival of people I am surrounded with in this moment with COVID and other political issue in Serbia. I find it very interesting that one therapy for depressed people is actually writing. And from other side, I actually trying to make a skill or a tool from literature with which I can work and I can earn to be able to live from it and satisfied with my work. And I really believe in that. And for me, that would be the freedom. You know, if freedom exists, for me, that would be freedom.
Thank you, Dragoslava. That seems to be kind of a part of your activist work as well. Leila?
I published my first book in 2008. I won this. It was some kind of contest, and I won it. Nobody know about me before it. And I remember it was also a collection of short stories called Anatomy of a Smile. And from 10 to two stories were dedicated to LGBT life in Sarajevo. And I remember the one member of the jury stood up then and said, "This is a woman who wrote first lesbian story in our literature." And from that moment, everybody know me like lesbian author who writes about who writes lesbian and LGBT stories. Previously, I also mentioned that I'm writing a lot of about the war. Situation was like that. After the war, I lost this Yugoslav identity, and I couldn't find myself in any other new, smaller, and somehow they call it pure ethnical identity. So there is also a term in our country for the people who feel themselves differently, and we are like a rest. This group of people, we are like others, not Muslims, not Serbian, not Croatians. We are others. But okay, in that time of 90s, it was really post-war time, and many things happened. But big deal for me was not only to find LGBT or queer literature. The big deal for me in Sarajevo during the 90s was to find really LGBT people. And in that time, I knew nobody around me. I was thinking that I was the only one, and that's why in this second book of short stories, I dedicated one story to a person, the only person who lived in my neighborhood, that I found out that she was a lesbian, and it was like from this point of view, it was like a miracle to me just to know anybody else like me. So that was my main battle in that time. And I will mention once again what about this book that Dragoslava edited about lesbian short stories. Maybe we need to have on mind that during 90s we didn't have social media, so the isolation was bigger than today. And then after that book and all what happened with Facebook and other and internet, it bring us together, and for me it became easier.
Absolutely. Thank you, Leila. I mean, even though there is only a couple of decades in between,
Yeah,
as you say, the
it's
kind
not
of the impact of social media for that sense of community has been huge. But I remember also when I was growing up, I mean, to be able to find a collection of short stories, lesbian short stories, would be impossible, not even impossible to imagine. So I think you are both you and Dragoslav are kind of pioneers in your own ways in terms of this groundbreaking work. Anya, what is your take on this question in terms of being a writer from now these small, ethnically so-called pure countries?
Yeah, quite different, I would say. Where I would add that I absolutely feel privileged that, and that this is a privilege that I didn't need to work about with this so closely, or that it was so directly in my face all the time, that I had the possibility to have absolute freedom. I think, for which I'm actually grateful that it was like that, because I don't know how I would handle it otherwise. That I was able to, because of this circumstances, to to put this on my agenda when I wanted to and how I wanted to. So I wasn't forced to put it in my writing or to put it in my life from the outside, but when I felt and how I felt, I could do it. If I would have to label myself, which I hate labels, really, because they don't bring, I don't know what good they bring. To me, they always bring negative shit, but not a lot of positive I saw coming from labeling. But if I would have to force to label myself, I would label myself as poet. I would not label myself as lesbian poet. I would not label myself as Slovenian poet. I don't know. None of this strikes anything with me. I just, it's naive. I'm fully aware of this, and I don't think that. I would like to stress that I don't think that fight isn't needed. On the contrary, I think fight is needed every fucking day, from when you get up to when you get down to bed again. But the way you fight is something that then you decide, if you have the privilege that you're able to decide it, no, that you're not called out because someone is bleeding already and you have to, take a stance. When I was thinking about it, how my life went, and how I saw the poetry evolving, I think I was always trying to stand alone. I never wanted to be a part of any kind of drawer that they would put me in, or that I didn't want to publish by a publishing house that would be LGBT. I wanted to come to this these older readers that don't expect lesbian themes in the books of a certain publishing house that is not LGBT, but like the main publishing houses that where readers mostly would not expect such themes. And I wanted to be someone who would then crawl in and then like jump out of the box and say, there are lesbian, there you go, there's a lesbian theme. Now let's talk about it. So I tried to do that for a while, and I published my second book with the biggest Slovene publishing house. That didn't go that well, and now I'm publishing them independently. I guess I always had this issue where I don't want to be a provocative. I'm just saying how I see it subjectively. I have a problem with victimization of my own role. I never wanted to allow anyone to see this any kind, that I'm a poet, that I'm a gay, that I'm a lesbian poet, that I'm a Slovenian poet, that I'm a woman, whatever of this, as something that they could victimize, that they could put me down with. So I never, in everything that I did publicly, I kind of didn't allow, I still try not to allow any kind of debate about this. Although, of course, every time I go to this, I said I have this column where I have 2 minutes to present what I'm talking about, and every time to now below I am then in this context of people writing what they commentaries. I'm all the time forced with, what does this male, who, she, he, whoever she is, who he is trying to talk about. So it's not about what I'm talking about for the society, things that are important, but it's about me and my looks. So I'm still confronted with this. And I still have to fight this. I still fight this, as I said, this fight goes on ruthlessly. I'm not giving in 1 inch to this.
As you say, as Ugrich also talks about this is about this kind of the baggage of labels and identifications that are always kind of placed on your writing, but also this sense of kind of that you're constantly being asked to become a spokesperson for a particular community. So being aware of this, and particularly for someone who comes from our region, is really important, because that's how the kind of the broader market operates, and you're kind of constantly trying to negotiate that role, at the same time keep your autonomy as a poet, as you say, or as a writer.
It's very easy for the general public to have a scapegoat in us. So to either make me someone who has to think for them, or they will agree or not agree, or to carry this torch or whichever other torch, because it's easier to put me somewhere. But I would
Yes,
like to be someone who's moving all the time.
absolutely. Leila, you wanted to add to this.
First of all, we don't have in Bosnia, I think also in Serbia and Croatia, still a specialized LGBT publishing houses. We have those who are willing to publish those books, and maybe some who are not. But what happened with my first book? Actually, I started writing after some mental issues. I had this episode with mental institution in Sarajevo, and my first book was about it. I was writing about this situation and the people who are in mental hospital in Sarajevo. Okay, two of them were with this LGBT topic, but I told you what this member of the jury said, and it wasn't. And I thought in that time that I didn't write a book about LGBT people. I wrote a book about mental problems we have after the war, but they labeled me. When I stood up, they said she's a lesbian writer who wrote a lesbian story, and okay, in that time, my case was that I decided not to defend myself from the thing from this what I am, but I just want to tell you that sometimes other people label you, and that's where I completely agree with Dubravka Ugrešić, because after the second book I published, and it was really it had a really good reception in former Yugoslavia and abroad, but it's completely and I had many readings and talkings about the book, and but it's completely different interest of the public in former Yugoslavia and abroad. Wherever I go in former Yugoslavia, they want me to talk about my lesbian experience, my queer experience of living in Bosnia today. When I go outside this outside Yugoslavia, they are not interested in that. Okay, they have their own LGBT movements and their rights for many decades. They want me to talk about my experience during the war, because for foreign audience, this war, the closing of the 20th century is in Europe is something like something they cannot understand completely, and then they only want me, and they perceive me as a writer from the country where was recently war. So I just want to say that sometimes we are not the one who label ourselves. Mostly the other labeled ourselves. But I understand it's up to us how we will react in this. Will we go with the flow, or we will do something else? Yeah, just that.
Absolutely. I mean, this is so interesting what you said, Leila. It's about kind of where you're speaking from or who your audience is, as you say, whether it's here or it's out there. I mean, it's so interesting, the kind of the layers of expectations and those labels that kind of constantly trail behind your writing. It's really interesting. But I'd like to also to focus a little bit on the kind of the human rights activist work, because some of you, like Dragoslava, are also human rights activists or have worked closely with the kind of LGBTQ human rights groups in the region. And while there have been some important legal changes, obviously everyday homophobia, transphobia, discrimination and violence are still ongoing issues that queer people face in the region. So I wonder whether you could say a little bit on or reflect on this relationship between writing and activism, or how you see your role as kind of contributing to some of the changes or emphasizing some of the issues, the kind of the ongoing issues that queer people in the region face.
I have one additional comment. I completely agree with Tanya, and thank you, Leila, for explain. I want to say that when I said that I'm a lesbian writer, that's my political statement. I want to be visible, that is reason for that label. Okay. Uh, yes. In spite of my writing, I also work in activist. Uh, 10 or 15 years, I don't know. I'm co-founder association the Sezna. In English, it should be known. That is the online platform, security base for documenting hate crime against queer people in Serbia. Our main tool is online website, which through questionnaire LGBT people completely anonymous and safe way to report violence and discrimination incidents. Founded in 2016, association this is now provides psychological and legal support for LGBT hate crime victims and survivors. And I think that this victim is not a bad word. We we are all the victims of patriarchy, of war, of 19th, and I think that not bad, not negative word. In Serbia, hate crimes were legally recognized in 2012. That is very important legislation in Serbia. When the criminal code was changed and it was introduced the article 54A, with recognized bias motivation as aggravating circumstance which courts are obliged to take into account. However, its problem in implementation that law. Article 54A is hardly ever used in practice. In the last 9 years, only 3 offenders were sentenced as hate crime. And I'm working on to change these bad statistics. Also, association that is now provides peer support for victims. And one devastating fact in Serbia, there is no shelter for LGBT people who experience homelessness. State does not provide or support any services for LGBT victims and survivors. And as I said, I closely work on daily basis on implementation of hate crimes in Serbia and court in my office and in street and everywhere.
Thank you, Dragoslav. I mean, that's one of the paradoxes, isn't it? That while we have these legal changes in practice, very little has happened in terms of persecution. But also, if you think about our current prime minister, although that's another topic
Yes, we
altogether.
have a lesbian prime minister, but we don't have implementation of hate crime in Serbia. That's paradox. In that paradox, we have to live in that paradox.
Yes, absolutely. What is the situation in Bosnia and Slovenia?
We also have this activist movement in Bosnia, and especially in Sarajevo and Tuzla and some other cities. But I mentioned before that I'm not an activist in a strict way of I'm linked to those people, and but I cannot find myself as an activist. First of all, I'm writing, and but I'm not exposed that much as some people there are. I was never. I didn't have this situation that somebody is threatening me or something like that. Those people, they had those situations, and I think they still have it. So that time, I cannot find myself in the same position, but we collaborate, and Sarajevo is a small city, we know each other, and I'm here to help in any way I can. We had first Pride 2 years ago. It was big deal here. It was really big deal, and it was maybe one of the best moments I can remember in last couple of years. We also had it last year, this in pandemic year, but in a different way, and I think it will continue. I found out a few days ago that this Sarajevo Open Center, it's the name of one. This is an activist
Association.
association. We call it Sarajevo Open Center, and they will, from this year, organize one art festival. The first one should be in June, as I understood, and I think that they are doing really, really important things here. But I also want to mention some other writers. First of all, Lamia Begagic, we are same generation. She also she have, I think, till now 4 books, and the last 2 books, one is novel, other is short stories. She's also a queer writer. She's openly writing about queer lives and identities. Also, there is a Tanja Stupar-Trifunovic from Banja Luka. She's known abroad because she is also a winner of this European literature prize, and her last novel is about lesbian couple. And I think now there is this also younger generation of writers, and many of them they have some queer stories or short stories or novels, or I think the situation is really changing here. I hope
Absolutely.
we will
Yes.
see in a couple of years, but I think it's changing for better.
Yes, certainly there seems to be a growing number of younger queer writers in the region. We should also perhaps mention Dino Pešut, who unfortunately was unable to join us today. And what's the situation in Slovenia, Anja?
As far as I know, there's a lot of young voices coming, and I think that's a very good thing. What me personally, how I work, because your question was about activism and how it works. I would say I would go back to what we discussed previously. Yeah. Thank you, Leila, for mentioning this. Yeah. This is a very important thing in my own private activism or public activism, because I yeah, I for example, this is a very good example that you mentioned, how they called you out, how they labeled you a person. Like, it's unbelievable how fear would, what fear would do. So you have a young female writer there, and then you call her a first lesbian, or the author of the first lesbian story, with which you label her completely, and then now she has to carry this because of your own fear, because you're afraid she's different from other people. So I try in my public life, but also my personal life, I try to be an activist against this, exactly against this fear that would then produce those kind of labels directed toward or pinned upon minorities of any kind, also this minority. I always put this out, that I'm gay, and that I want to be perceived as such. It's very hard to cover it, obviously, from the labels they have in mind how you should look like. I'm like everything. I'm like, there you go. So it wouldn't be, I wouldn't need to mention it even, but I do. I recklessly do. I remember an incident when I was invited to a secondary school of economy school, secondary, like children, youngsters there were from 14 to 18, I think, and then they put 3 of them in the hall, and then I was a guest, and they could ask me. 2 of them asked me questions. It was like an interview and then a reading. And of course there's hormones, like, sky high there. These old people, like, that you will have hormones, and I did. There was, you could see that it's a problem. So I decided to address the problem, as I always do. And when I was asked about how I was a child, as a child, I said I used a lot of Gedore tools from my father. And then this probably should tell everyone that I was a lesbian, and which I said like directly into the microphone. And then I waited, and it was like all of a sudden, and it stayed like this for like 2 minutes. But I continued talking about how I then started writing poems and so on and so on. And after 2 minutes, then we came to terms with this fact that I was a lesbian. And then I mentioned it once again in between. And then I read my poems, which I chose to be those poems that are directed, where the subject of the poems is a female subject directed at another female subject. So we were sure that it really is true that I am gay, and also the poetry is gay poetry. But then I also said that I'm sure that among these 100 people, there must be 5 to 10 people that are anything but straight, anything else, just not straight. And that I would like to tell them that it's possible and that you can do it, that it's not a problem, that they shouldn't be afraid. I tried to. This is like the incident I remember when I thought about how I am an activist. I tried to do it like that. It's just an example. It's a small thing maybe, but yeah, exactly as Leila said, this should not happen. And for that, I tried to find that it would not happen to younger people, to younger writers from here, like when they are starting.
Absolutely. I think that's so interesting that you mentioned that you were actually able to go to a secondary school and openly speak to younger people there. I don't think that would still be possible in Bosnia and Serbia. So I think that's definitely a kind of a difference, a positive
What,
difference.
can I ask why? Because it wouldn't be possible because they know you're gay or
Well, I'm just
or
thinking
queer.
about the educational system there and how well, to what extent is it is possible to speak about queer related subject
Ah,
in primary and
I
secondary
don't think.
schools.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. I was invited there as a poet.
Right.
So I detonated a bomb there, basically, which they didn't expect. I was invited there on
Okay,
behalf
that's
to be
interesting.
like a guest poet, where there also normally would come a 60 to 70-year-old man with like a bunch of books they published with huge labels in Slovenia, and then they would talk about their poetry. So because the teacher there was um really liberal. She read my poetry and she liked my poetry, and she thought that maybe pupils there should could have a chance to like see me in person also, and I could read some poems and so. But then of course I thought like when I'm already there,
So, well, you are that is a kind of a little piece of activist work, I think, there as well, Anya. So that's really interesting. But I think visibility is so important. I think not only in terms of having queer lives represented in literature or our stories being told in all their diversity and complexity, but also in terms of reclaiming older works with kind of LGBTQ reading possibilities as part of our history. But at the same time, our own queer history, global queer history, is full of breaks, silences, and discontinuities. So how important it is for you to tell those stories as a writer, and how does this also relate, speaking to some of the points that Anya mentioned, to the freedom to write about whatever you want that may not necessarily be queer related?
Yes, and when I would write about beautiful summer morning, it would be queer, not because I write for my queer or lesbian identity, but because uh, I try to write authentically, and every good literature is queer for me. And authentically of literature work is queer too. Also, emotivity in the world that insists on rationality and glorifies reasons. Reason, emotivity is also very queer for me.
I like your idea of queering a beautiful summer
Mm,
morning.
yes, everything is queer. It's uh, in our perception. Queerness is our perception.
Absolutely. Thank you. Leila?
Maybe even obsessed with the past and the queer past of Sarajevo. Because I think in many things we always we think that we are the first. But I have found some sources, some also writers before the war, during the Yugoslavia, who were queer writers. Okay, under the other circumstances, but I have found them. But I'm also really, really interested in how queer community, or not community, but queer persons lived in Sarajevo in the past. And believe it or not, I also I've in before the pandemic, I used my time to go to archives in Sarajevo. I have found one person who become I cannot say in medical sense of transition, but this in I found the person who lived in Sarajevo during between two world wars. It's during 30s that she became a male from female. And I found the article in a newspaper, and so I think I'm interested in those things. And you said okay, and Foucault, and it is definitely that we had many pauses, and that we don't have this that we are very often can find this continuity or something like that. But if we look uh, and search for some things, I think that we can uh, trace some tracks before us, and I'm somehow obsessed with those things, and I'm now even try to write something about the queer past of Sarajevo. It was always here, but in other circumstances.
That is so fascinating. I think keep up with the good archaeological work. I mean, it's a work of excavation and reclamation, as you say. But it's so fascinating this story that you mentioned. I mean, I when I was preparing for the panel, I was wondering, well, are there any trans stories, trans writers from the post-Yugoslav region that is probably a marginalized history that we still need to kind of reconstruct and reclaim and find a place for it. I'm really curious. Thank you. Great. Anya.
Yeah. Um, Here I would say you mentioned before the story that you wrote about the woman and in Zovite me Esteban, the only one that you found that was gay, the first one that you found that was gay from Sarajevo. That story is extremely fascinating because it's so well written. So for me, it's a brilliant one of the favorite stories that I read from you because it's so well written. So yeah, of course, this topic of exactly this topic made it probably to be written this way, helped that it was written this way, exactly this way. And yeah, of course, in this sense, I would completely agree with Dragoslava. Yeah, I am who I am, so I cannot not write this way. And of course, the special experiences that I have as a minority, many times over minority, so like being a woman, for example, or being gay, or others also that I am a part of, this taught me things and also shaped how I see the world and how I am towards it. So both ways, how I see it and how I then would go and react with it or not. Sometimes also not. And why not then? Because of different things. And how one very important topic for me is how I would react towards aggression, like passive or active aggression, for whichever reason, like noise or whatever that would come and would interact with my life this way or the other. this very important for me, how I would then write, how my autopoetics would be. So in that sense, I'm very much shaped by everything that I have to put on me, or that is put on me, and I have to put away in order to be able to be free and to write from this free position, which is the only possible position that I can even try to write. Then I would just add that I also know of a person who is a woman who is female by birth, but then was in society interacted also as male. And I found out a couple of years ago already, she was born in the same place I was born. So she's actually we actually the plat. There's a little plat on the building where she was born. This is maybe 200 meters from a crow fly line from where we live. And she was a lawyer. Her name was Ljuba Prener. She was a lawyer, but she also wrote. So we have also some texts from her, although she mostly worked as a lawyer. So she would also be one of those to include in this kind of anthology. Very interesting also to.
Absolutely. That's so interesting. I mean, then we have the whole tradition of Virginas in Montenegro. There was a film, I think, a couple of years ago about it. But again, maybe some people have written about it, which is, again, something that we rarely talk about. Right? So one of the key aims of both festivals, Krokodil and The Coast is Queer, is to promote and celebrate queer lives and writing. So let's end the panel on a celebratory note, and I'm deeply grateful for your generosity and your time and for sharing all your experiences. As you all write in different genres, I would like to invite each one of you to read a short sample of your writing. So I will invite Anya first.
I will read one poem from my fourth book, with which I would say that this is just translated. It's not published because it seems not to be possible for me to be published in English for whichever reason. So this translation is from a one of the best translators in Slovenia called Tadeja Spruk, but just for me. Like, I will read it in both languages because it's really short. It's called Delo svetlobe in Slovene and Labor of Light in English. So I'll first read in Slovene and then in English. Delo svetlobe. Delo svetlobe je ubijalsko, luč, ki je nočemo, najčistejša luč, telo, ki ga obožujemo, izmučeno telo. In še najbolj kumrn vseh plodov postaja sam drevo, ko čas, ko megla v pasovih ovira promet. Teče, kar je ploščato strohni, kar je iz vode hlapi in kar zadostuje, je vse lej premalo v primerjavi z zamolklim žarenjem kron brez. The labor of light. The labor of light is exhausting. The lighting we refuse the purest of lights, the body we cherish, a worn-out body, and even the puniest of fruits becomes a tree, as time, when patches of mist disrupt the traffic, passes. What is flat will decay, what is water will evaporate, and what suffices is always too little compared with the hollow blazing of birch crowns.
Thank you, Anya. That was wonderful hearing it in both languages, in a kind of a stark defiance to Brexit and borders. Thank you. I would like to invite Dragoslava now.
The death of my parents in the village. The funeral meal, all of the relatives and neighbors have come. I don't know any of them. The death of my parents in the village, it played out long ago in the future. I cannot summon the memory, I cannot cry. After a long and difficult illness, the death of their 8-hour workday occurred unsurprisingly, inconspicuously. The news posted only on the community Facebook page. The couple died, leaving behind just 3 more years to retirement. funeral paid for by the daughter, a lesbian. In the last few years, they maintained a Slovenian-made kitchen and leather living room suite, but not contact. They strung rosaries of their working years. They died of humiliation over me. Because I don't have a steady job, a husband, and 3 kids, the Holy Trinity with no room for accommodation. They built a big family house, not with heads, not with limbs, not with whole bodies, but with their own 10 fingers. They built a house greater than their socialist dreams, greater than brothers and sisters, than comrades, drugovi i drugarice. A house that will be the mausoleum of our jiggered lives. The death of my parents in the village, it played out long ago in my childhood. The entirety of which fit into the gift pack that came from mother's workplace on New Year's, into the inflated foil pillow of large sticky peanut puffs and the bar of crispy rice chocolate, the most delicious present of the 19th.
Thank you, Dragoslava. Hopefully we will be able to provide the link to your poem that is obviously available online in English translation. Thank you so much. I like the kind of the sense of nostalgia that it evokes, but at the same time, this kind of sense of rejection by the parents as well. Thank you. And finally, Leila, would you like to read a short section from your writing?
Yes, I will read a few parts from this short story from the book Call Me Esteban. I already mentioned that the book will be published this year in English, and I had a really great luck to meet translator Jennifer Zobel. She really made a great translation of the book. And also I was previously talking a little about this short story in which I'm talking about the only person I knew in my neighborhood that she was gay, and I wrote the story after I have found out that she died, and I will read just few small parts. Story is named Bella Ciao. Forgive me. I know it took me too long. I'm sorry it's too late. I went up there. I was at your place. But I want to tell you more than that. I need to tell you everything. Sometimes I'd walk down your street, as in unwillingly, acting like I was in a hurry. I would constantly check my watch. It's funny to me now because I know you knew perfectly well that I didn't hurry anywhere, that I had nowhere to be. So many times I wanted to ask, what was it like for you? Where did you hang out? Where did you go? One time I gathered up some courage and lingered a bit near your house. I light a cigarette and gaze out at the city. Suddenly, something cracked. Your front door opened, and I caught sight of you taking out the trash. I chuckled from panic and stared at Viečnica like I'd never seen it before. In an instant, you looked at me, and I looked back as if by accident. You nodded in a sign of greeting, turned, and went back inside. The door closed. Ciao, my Bella. The year passed. Bella, ciao. I don't know whether other worlds exist. I have no answers. But I swear to you, I'll remember you madly, however long I can, whenever I can. Because you must know, you being there made it easier for me. Know this too. People will pass by. They'll come better and braver than I. They'll snap photos. They'll admire it. With your eyes, they'll see the city. What a lovely house, they'll say. They will, Bella. They will. And that's the small part.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Leila. I can't wait to when the book comes out in English translation. Perhaps we can organize a launch event here again. That would be fantastic. And I hope this panel invites more translations of this wonderful queer literature from the post-Yugoslav region. So thank you all for participating and sharing your thoughts in the panel. I would also like to thank the organizers, New Writing South and the Marlborough Theatre. And I'm particularly thankful to Brighton University's Radical Future, who generously supported this panel. Thank you all so much, and we look forward to read more of your writing. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
participating in
Thank
the
you.
Coast is Queer.
Thank you.
Thank you.